The Civil War has ended. Now he's the guy responsible to put the country back together. What is he going to do with the citizens in the South? What is he going to do with the states that seceded from the Union? A lot of people in the North think he ought to do what to those people? Punish. Very good. Needs to punish them. And Lincoln's going to develop a plan for reconstruction of the South, which is going to cover both Southern citizens and Southern states. How are we going to handle these citizens that fought against us in battle? How are we going to handle these states that seceded from the Union? And a lot of his own party, a group called the Radical Republicans, felt like the best way to handle the South was to punish the South. Well, he's going to develop a plan on what to do. Unfortunately, he's not going to live to see it through. Okay, his plan will not go into effect. It will be the responsibility of Vice President Andrew Johnson, after Lincoln is assassinated, to reconstruct the South. I think Lincoln had a very good plan. It was very controversial because a lot of Northerners thought he was being way too kind to these traitors, you know, that seceded and fought against us. But I'm going to tell you what his plan is. This is what he would have done if he would have lived. Would he have got it done? Would he have faced some opposition? Absolutely. But we'll never know. Now, we're going to start with what he was going to do with Southern citizens. Those folk that lived in those Southern states, many who bore arms against the Union, although many lost lives too. What's he going to do with Southern citizens? Nope. He's going to offer them, and Brady I think said he's going to offer them amnesty. Okay, what's amnesty? Anybody know what a more common name for amnesty is? Or a pardon. Very good. Amnesty is simply a fancy name for a pardon. So Cody doesn't bring his 3-ring binder in today, and it makes me kind of frustrated. And so everybody thinks I had to kick him out of class, but I'm going to give him amnesty. I'm going to give him a pardon this time, but he's going to have to do something for me in return. So Lincoln's going to give these people amnesty or a pardon, but this is what they have to do in return. Okay, number 1. They have to sign an oath of allegiance to the Union. They have to sign or pledge their allegiance to the Union. They have to pledge allegiance to the United States. Okay? So in order to get amnesty, if you were a Southern citizen, you needed to take an oath of allegiance or pledge allegiance to the United States formally. And you also had to promise to accept all federal laws, including those that abolished slavery. So if you want to be back in the United States, you've got to accept all federal laws, laws of the United States, and you have to understand that slavery is no more, and you will follow that law. If a person signed an oath of allegiance to the Union and promised to accept federal laws, including those that abolish slavery, they could come back in as American citizens. Pretty generous, really, right? Okay? A lot of Northerners thought that was terribly easy. But what's he trying to do here? Preserve the nation. Get them back. Why make it difficult?
If they did it that way, it still would be divided in a sense.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's exactly right. If we treated them harshly, they're not going to want to come back in. We're not going to have a union together. Now, there were some Southern citizens that were not given a pardon by Lincoln. There were Southern citizens he refused to pardon. Now, who might those be that he would not? What? God, you're awesome. You're going to be the MVP today. Southern citizens who served as high-ranking officers would not be given amnesty or a pardon. Which would include who?
Robert E. Lee.
Robert E. Lee, yeah. Very good. So his plan was that Southern citizens who served as high-ranking officers in the Confederate Army would not be given a pardon or amnesty.
So what did you use? Jail officers?
Well, that nobody knows what would have happened, seriously, because
It never went through.
it never went through.
Then they should have arrested Robert E. Lee right after he signed it.
Yeah, well, yeah, we'll see. But again, this is his plan. He's facing opposition, he's gonna be assassinated, and we'll get to what Johnson does, okay? Which is pretty interesting. What might be another citizen that would not be given amnesty? Close. How about the citizen that had a position in the federal government who left to take a position in the Confederate government? That's the other one.
He'll be probably.
Not deserters, no, if you say you served in
So
President
if
Lincoln's.
you left the Union to go to the South, you would not.
No, because
If you left, if you were working for the federal government, in other words, let's say you were a
Treason.
Secretary of State, that's
Yeah.
way off, and you left that to go join the Confederate government and be something in their government, then you couldn't get amnesty. And that wasn't Secretary of State, that's just an example.
I think you're thinking like treason.
Anybody that left a federal government job and went and worked for the Confederate government could not get amnesty. If you were working for the federal government and you left and went and worked for the Confederate government, you could not get amnesty. Those were his conditions on individual citizens. Now, how many states seceded from the Union? 11. How are they going to get back? That was the next question, and this was his plan for those 11 states to be able to come back into the Union as Union states. Now, some people might say, well, maybe they didn't want it. How good a shape were they in? Big, horrible. So they're, they wanted to, okay? Now, this was pretty interesting. One simple thing. This is the state of Dewar, okay? In order for you to get back into the Union, because we seceded, 10% of you in here would have to pledge your allegiance to the Union. Only 10%. So in order for the state of Dewar to get back in, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 23. So how many? About 2.3 kids in here. Round it to 3. If 3 of you signed an allegiance to the Union, then the whole state could get in. Is that making it fairly easy for states to get back in?
That's still a lot of
Yeah,
people.
but that's still a lot of people. But yeah, that's what he wanted though. He wants to unite the country. He doesn't want to make it hard for these states to get in. That doesn't unify the country. So that was the rule on states. If 10% of your voting population would sign an oath of allegiance to the Union, the state could get back in. Okay, now that'll take us, and this might surprise you, maybe you didn't know this, that'll take us to our next subtopic, which is the planned kidnapping of Abraham Lincoln, or President Lincoln. How many people knew that the plan was to kidnap him first before assassinating him?
Quite a few.
Yeah, no, this was an interesting story. Now, whether or not Lincoln would have gotten acceptance for his plan for Reconstruction, we'll never know. Because Lincoln has a lot of enemies after the Civil War, on both sides. Southerners who hate his guts for the war, and Northerners who hate him because he's too soft on the South. So he's got a lot of enemies. This is an interesting story. 2 days after Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, 2 days afterwards, Lincoln addressed a crowd and gave a speech outside the White House. He just stood out there and gave a speech. You could do that in those days. You could never do that now. But 2 days after Lee surrendered to Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, Virginia, Lincoln was out in front of the White House giving a speech to the crowd that had gathered to hear him talk. And he talked about all kinds of things. Miss McIntosh, he talked about all kinds of things. But one thing he said caught the ire of one particular individual. Lincoln said to the crowd during his speech that he was going to support voting rights for black males who did not have the right to vote yet. So as he sat at the White House giving this speech of talking about lots of things to this big crowd that came to watch him, one of the things that he states in that speech is he is going to support voting rights for black males.
Right, that probably made more than one.
Well, it probably did. But one of the people in the crowd listening to President Lincoln say that was none other than John Wilkes Booth. He's in the crowd 2 days after Lee's surrender to Grant at the White House while Lincoln's giving a speech, and he hears Lincoln say that he's going to give voting rights to black males. John Wilkes Booth, he's in the crowd. Well, women might be upset too because they didn't have the right to vote at that time. Now, who was John Wilkes Booth? He was a Southern sympathizer who hated everything President Lincoln stood for. John Wilkes Booth was a Southern sympathizer. In other words, he sympathized with the South. He was a Southerner. And he hated everything that President Lincoln stood for. He blamed Lincoln for every problem the South had after the Civil War. He hated the man. Okay? So Booth was a Southern sympathizer. He hated everything the president stood for, and he blamed Lincoln for all of the South's problems following the war. Now, usually if you're blaming everybody for something, don't you have a few issues yourself? And here's the issue Booth had about the Civil War. Okay? Booth was feeling guilty about the Civil War. Why would he be feeling guilty about the Civil War?
He probably didn't serve.
He didn't serve. Okay? He didn't fight for the Confederacy. So he's sitting there watching others die in battle, giving up their lives for the Southern cause, and in his guilty mind, he hasn't done anything. So what's he going to do to contribute to the Southern cause? Not yet. He's going to devise a plan during the summer of 1864 to kidnap President Lincoln. So because Booth is feeling guilty about not serving the Confederacy and watching others die for the cause, he decides he's going to try to do something to make up for it. And what he's going to do is he's going to kidnap the President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln. Now obviously he's going to kidnap him in return for something, right? Some sort of ransom. That's why else would you kidnap somebody, right? Anybody want to guess what he was going to do with the president once he kidnapped him?
He wanted to like ransom legislation.
No, that's a good guess. That's a good guess. But the war is only over, a couple of days, right? And he hears this speech, and so what's if he capture? I'll just tell you this much. His plan is to capture Lincoln and take him to Richmond, Virginia. But what's he going to ransom him for? What's he going to try to get for him?
For the Confederacy succession from the Union?
No, something. He's going to trade him for Confederate
Armed.
that haven't been released yet.
Prisoners of war.
Prisoners of war. Very good. So his plan, as deranged as it may seem, is he was going to kidnap the president, take him to Richmond, and hold him in return for Confederate prisoners of war that were still being held. That was his plan. That was going to be, kiddos, his contribution to the South, because he felt so guilty that he did not fight himself. He's going to kidnap the president, he's going to take him to Richmond, Virginia, and he's going to hold him hostage until they release all of Confederate prisoners of war that are still being held. That was his thought. Well, he doesn't think he can do it on his own, so in January of 1865, he organizes a group of co-conspirators, people to help him do this. A lot of people don't know that. Everybody thinks Lincoln did everything on his own. He did it far from his own. Okay? He puts together in January of 1865 a group of co-conspirators to help him. I'm going to tell you. I'm going to give you names and tell you about them. Now, some of these co-conspirators were Confederate soldiers, some were Southern sympathizers like himself, and some were simply his friends. So I'm going to tell you, and they're on your ID sheet, so that's why I want you to have it out so you can see the names. These are the co-conspirators that with John Wilkes Booth were planning on kidnapping President Lincoln. Okay? Here they are. John Surratt Jr. Either write what I tell you on your paper or maybe on your sheet, however you want to do it. John Surratt Jr.
And that's with Samuel Hunter.
Yeah, we're going to go down the list, Jeff. Now, what about John Surratt Jr.? He was a Confederate courier. What does that mean? Deliver messages. So he had served as a Confederate courier in the Civil War. Now, he was only involved in the kidnapping plot. He was only involved in the kidnapping plot. It's important you know this, so get it written down however you can do it comfortably. John Surratt Jr. He was a Confederate courier, and he was only involved in the kidnapping part of this thing. Okay? The next co-conspirator was Sam Arnold. He was a Confederate soldier who was only involved in the kidnapping plot. Okay? Samuel Arnold, a Confederate soldier, only involved in the kidnapping plot. So far, so good? George Atzerodt. He was a Confederate blockade runner. What's that mean? Like in Vicksburg, what would he be doing as a blockade runner in Vicksburg while the Union was bombing the devil?
He was the
Blockade runner.
Blockade runner.
He would be sneaking, well no, blockade runner would be someone that would be sneaking food,
No.
medicine, supplies, running a blockade to try to get things into Vicksburg, for example. So blockade runner, his job was to try to get supplies and medicine and food, etc. into these places that were blockaded. Okay? Did I? Oh, I did. That's okay. All right, we'll go back. Sorry. Now, George Atzerodt was involved in both the plan to kidnap and then assassinate the president. So he's involved in both. I'm sorry, I did skip one there. Ransom, we got to go back to Michael O'Loughlin. Which one? Atzerodt. Atzerodt. He was involved in both the plan to kidnap the president and the assassination.
Then we do Michael O'Loughlin.
We're going to go back to Michael O'Loughlin. Yeah, I missed it. He was also a Confederate soldier, along with Arnold. And he was only involved in the kidnapping plot. So, let's just go back because I mixed you up. John Surratt Jr., Confederate courier, involved in only the kidnapping plot. Samuel Arnold, a Confederate soldier, only involved in the kidnapping plot. Michael O'Loughlin, a Confederate soldier, only involved in the kidnapping plot. George Atzerodt, a Confederate blockade runner, involved in both the kidnapping and the assassination. David Harold. Is he next on the list? David Harold. He was simply a friend of Booth's. Friend of Booth's. And he will be involved in both the kidnapping attempt and the assassination. David Harold, simply a friend of Booth, who will be involved in plans to both kidnap and then to assassinate the president. Oh yeah. Yeah,
That's why you know the names.
the reason that I'm giving them to you and telling you between the difference between kidnapping and both is because they'll be treated differently when caught. Okay? All right, David Harold, everybody have that one? Okay, Lewis Powell. Don't write this down, but he also had the alias of Lewis Payne. So if you hear Payne or Powell, they're the same person.
Lewis
How do you
Yeah.
spell pain?
Well, don't even worry about it. P-A-I-N if you care. P-A-I-N-E. So, Lewis Powell. He was a Confederate soldier that had been trained in guerrilla tactics. You know what guerrilla tactics are? Breaking the rules, slitting throats, whatever it takes. Okay, not fighting by the rules. What?
Is he involved in both?
I'm going to get to that. Confederate soldier trained in guerrilla tactics, involved in both plans. Yeah, involved in both plans. He was a mean dude. He was a bad man, Lewis Powell, really bad man. He was a Confederate soldier, was trained in guerrilla tactics. I would tell you he has no conscience, and he was involved in both plans to kidnap and assassinate. Okay, here we go, Leilani, my dear. This will help you a little. Mary Surratt. This poor gal. Mary Surratt. She was a Southern sympathizer. Obviously wasn't a soldier, wasn't really a friend of Booth's. She was simply a Southern sympathizer. Mary Surratt, Southern sympathizer.
Lewis with both, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now just listen maybe before you write down. Mary Surratt, she was a Southern sympathizer. Her problem was she allowed Booth to use her tavern in Virginia and her boarding house in Washington DC for meetings to plan to kidnap and then assassinate the president. So although she wasn't involved in either, she allowed him to use her
Yeah.
property to plan it. Yeah, we'll get to that. So Mary Surratt is a Southern sympathizer. She allows Booth to use her tavern that she runs in Virginia and her boarding house that she has in Washington DC for meetings during both the plans to kidnap and then to assassinate the president.
Did she know these meetings were going on?
Yeah, I think so. She was a Southern sympathizer.
So she knew.
I think so, yeah. Later, she would provide Booth with a pair of binoculars after the assassination, and she was the mother of John Surratt Jr., that we first talked about. So she was involved as a Southern sympathizer. She let Booth use her tavern and her boarding house for meetings to plan both the assassination, or excuse me, kidnapping and the assassination. She also gave Booth a pair of binoculars after the assassination for his use, and was the mother of John Surratt Jr. So that's how she got herself involved, frankly. Now this poor guy, Dr. Samuel Mudd. You ever heard the expression, your name is Mudd because you did something wrong? Anybody ever heard that expression? Your name is Mudd? No. Have you, from your grandparents or something? Yeah, yeah, well, you know, that's where this comes from. This is where that expression comes from. I'll explain in a minute. Dr. Samuel Mudd was a Southern doctor. He wasn't a Southern sympathizer so much. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a friend of Booth's. He was a Southern doctor who frankly was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He will treat Booth for an injury after the assassination.
So he wasn't involved, he was in the wrong place.
Absolutely. You'll hear the story. It's a great